Welcome back to Andersen Acres, and thanks for joining me for another episode of Farm Fights, the monthly podcast where we dig into controversial or commonly misunderstood topics in the homesteading and hobby farming world. Today we're tackling a question that stirs up quite a bit of debate in online farm groups among seasoned chicken keepers and definitely during chick season. We're talking about brooder plates versus heat lamps. And we're doing it with these guys who have just moved to an outside grow out pen, figure out how to chicken. So the guys behind me are still fairly young. They don't need heat anymore, but they do need a little time to learn how to chicken in the great outdoors. So that's what's going on behind me. So brooder plates versus heat lamps. Which is better? Which is safer, and which one should you be using in your own brooder setup? So first, let's take the emotion out of it. Let's take away the "my grandpa always did it this way" argument. My grandpa always did things a certain way too, and that was mostly due to what they had available at the time. This isn't about tradition or nostalgia. This is about keeping your chicks alive, healthy, and thriving, and making sure you're as safe as possible while doing so. And we are going to approach this with facts, not feelings, because you can't decide what's exactly right for your situation on your own hobby farm if you aren't aware of the facts, okay? Everyone's situation is different. What works for one doesn't work for another. But you need some basic facts before you can evaluate and make the decision. So that's what we're doing here today. So here's the deal. Both heat lamps and brooder plates have their place in chick rearing, but they are very different tools with very different safety profiles, different costs, and different learning curves. Understanding those differences is the key to making the right choice for your situation. Your situation isn't mine, but you need to understand the tools available, how they work, what situations they're best in, before you can decide what's best for your situation. So today we're going to look at upfront cost versus long-term cost, meaning the cost of electricity to run, fire safety, chick health and behavior, the ease of use and the learning curve associated with each option, and real-world objections and how to respond to them, and basically just answering a couple of questions. So we're going to start with the most talked about factor. We're going to start with safety, because safety is a big deal. Okay, we all want our little chicks, like the little dolls behind me, to be safe, to be happy, to be healthy. But if they're not safe, they can't be happy or healthy because they're dead. So we have to make sure we're dealing with safety first. Now, heat lamps are responsible for thousands of coop, brooder, and house fires every year. That is a fact, okay? Even when they are well secured, even when they are properly used, they can fall, they can shift, they can overheat bedding, a chick can jump into them, dislodge something, they can get coated in too much dust, and that dust can ignite, and we all know that chicks are dusty. They can't help it. They're chicks. They're dusty as heck. But we have to be aware of the fact that they are indeed dusty and that that dust could cause a fire. And when a fire happens, or when something goes wrong, it doesn't take long to go from a little bit of smoke to disaster. Okay? Add that to the fact that when you have young chicks, their heat source needs to be on basically 24/7. So you're running your heat lamp 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's compounding the risk. On the other hand, brooder plates, well, they are not completely safe. There's no completely safe. Anytime you have electricity, you have a fire risk. Okay, electricity is a fire risk. That's just the way it is. If you have power running to your brooder, which you probably do, whether you use a heat plate or a brooder plate, there is a risk of fire. There's always a risk of failure. However, brooder plates are a low voltage contact based heating system. They don't radiate heat the way heat lamps do, and they sit low to the ground. making it difficult for anything flammable to actually come in contact with the heating element. And even if it does, the heat is a lot lower, more the body temperature of a hen, instead of the hot heat lamp that you raise and lower based on whether your chicks are hot or cold. The heat plate stays in one position and is basically the same temperature as a hen, so it doesn't even get as hot. Now, that doesn't mean they can't cause a fire. Like we just finished talking about, it absolutely is possible for anything that you plug in to start a fire. The lamp beside your bed could start a fire. Your phone charger could start a fire. Is it likely? No. But let's not pretend it's not possible, right? It is possible. It's entirely possible. So, simply put, when it comes to fire risk, brooder plates are hands down safer. There is no safe way, 100% safe without any risk, way to heat your brooder. If you're looking for a way that is completely risk-free, it doesn't exist. Okay? So, the brooder plates are safer, and they are probably the safest way. But if you have a brooder with a heat source, you have a potential fire risk. It's a low chance if you're using a brooder plate. I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm not saying don't raise chicks because you have to plug in a brooder plate and it might cause a fire. It's a potential. Let's not pretend anything is zero risk, okay? But brooder plates are way lower risk, way, way lower, because the only thing that can fail is the electrical, right? They're not actually hot enough to cause a fire. Can they overload? Sure. Could something short out? Sure. But that can happen with anything you plug in. When it comes to which is safer, it is definitely the heat plate is safer than a heat lamp. Now let's talk about cost, because this is what people find off-putting most of the time. This is most of the objections you're going to see. Brooder plates do cost more. Let's not pretend. Depending on the brand or the size, you could pay anywhere from $40-50 all the way up to $120 or even more for the larger sizes, where a basic clamp light with a bulb might run you $10-20 at your local farm store. The upfront cost is definitely higher with a brooder plate. Just waiting for that rooster to stop crying. But the upfront cost is definitely higher with a brooder plate, cheaper with a heat lamp. Total cost, it starts to reverse. Because here's the thing, the cost, thank you, but the cost that you pay upfront at the store is not the total cost. Heat lamps use significantly more electricity. Over the course of a 4 to 6 week, thanks, but over the course of a 4 to 6 week brooding period, that difference is going to add up. Your electrical bill is going to take a hit. Bulbs also burn out, they break, they overheat. A lot of times you have to start replacing clamps or replacing bulbs multiple times in a season. And that's normal. The bulbs are not going to last forever. Brooder plates, once purchased, if they are used appropriately and stored properly for the winter, typically last for years. So then the only cost you're paying is the electricity, and they do cost significantly less to run. Their wattage is way lower. It's just math. Their wattage is way lower, therefore they add less to your electricity bill. There's no heat source that you plug in that won't add to your electrical bill. I mean, plugging in your phone charger adds to your electrical bill. That's just life. But the brooder plates cost less on your electrical bill. They will put you out of pocket more up front. So sometimes it literally does come down to how much cash do I have in my pocket. Sometimes that is a huge factor in which we pick. So sometimes that's all, sometimes you do what you can do, and sometimes all you can afford is the heat lamp. Sometimes that's what you do. But the upfront cost is harder on your wallet. The long-term cost is lower. So again, cost-benefit analysis, right? Like, do I have the money right now to buy a brooder plate? Do I not have the money right now to buy a brooder plate? So sometimes that's just what you have to ask yourself, whether or not you even have the cash. So let's talk about effectiveness and chick behavior, because this, to me, is the most important factor. To other people, it might be the money, but for me, it's the chick behavior and how effective they are. Heat lamps radiate heat. That's what they do. They're a radiant heat source. And they do it through the whole brooder. So you control where the heat is by moving the heat lamp around, either side to side, so you're only putting heat on the one side, or you do it so that you raise it up so that it's cooler, or you lower it down so it's hotter, whatever, right? There are things that you do in order to control the heat, but it's entirely by moving the heat lamp around. That means chicks are always in a warm, lit space, which isn't actually that natural, to be honest. Okay? Chicks generally don't have that. So in the wild, in the barn with mama, they don't have that. Or out in the bush with mama, they don't have that. So the thing to remember is that under a heat lamp, chicks do tend to sleep less, they peck more, and they can struggle to regulate their own temperatures. And someone's going to tell me, well, they're red lights for a reason. Even red light does change their sleep pattern. Okay? So you are disrupting their natural rhythms by having a light on them 24/7. Just the way it is. Brooder plates mimic a mother hen. Chicks go underneath to warm up, and then they come out to explore, eat, drink, do their chicky stuff. This allows them to learn to self-regulate their body temperature and naturally do that because they go warm up, come out to cool down, warm up, cool up, come out to cool down. It also allows them to sleep better because they're not bathed in constant red or white light. Okay? In short, brooder plates do promote more natural behavior. But let's talk about why brooder plates sometimes get a bad rap in those online chicken groups. Why are people like, brooder plates didn't work for me? The big one is the learning curve. This is a big one and it's often overlooked. People don't always realize that there is a learning curve with brooder plates. They don't necessarily work the way you think they're supposed to work. Okay? So let's talk about it. Brooder plates are not a radiant heat source. They don't, if you hold your hand a whole inch away from the heat plate, you're not going to feel much heat. You only if you touch the back of your hand to it will you feel any warmth. They work through contact. Okay? That means they need to be low enough for the chicks to press their backs against it so that they can warm up. If they just stand under it, they're not getting warm enough. Think of it like snuggling up to mama. They have to snuggle up to their mama to get warm. Because if you're 2 inches away from mama, you're not going to feel much heat. Yeah, a little bit, not enough to stay warm. When people don't understand how a heat plate works, they set the plate too high, expecting it to heat the air like a lamp, or they set it on its side, expecting it to warm up the brooder. There are plates that do that. They're not actually brooder plates, but there are plates that you mount sideways and they are a radiant heat source. But we're not talking about those. We're talking about actual brooder plates that go horizontal and do not radiate. They just warm up. Okay? So if you expect it to heat the air and it doesn't, then your chicks get chilled. They pile on each other or they just outright die because they're not warm enough. And then the conclusion becomes, because we're all human, right? And we don't have a natural instinct to look for ourselves as the cause. That's just the way we are. We're all like that. So let's not pretend we're not all like that. Most of us are going to look for a reason that is not us. Why did this happen? And not take responsibility. That's just the way humans are. We're all like that. So instead of going, maybe I used this incorrectly, the conclusion becomes, well, these don't work because my chicks died. Instead of going, okay, did I follow the directions? Did I read the directions? Did I ask questions when I didn't understand the directions? Or did I just make an assumption about how this plate works and then I didn't use it right and then my chicks didn't make it? Okay? You have to be an instruction reader if you're going to learn to use a heat plate. If all you've ever used are heat lamps, they don't work the same way. Okay? The learning curve causes a whole lot of negative reviews or word of mouth skepticism. But when used correctly, brooder plates are really, really effective. Okay? So people who use them the way they're intended to be used generally have excellent experiences. People who try to use them when it's below freezing or they don't use them correctly, they generally will have a poor experience. If you use them, read the directions. Okay? If you buy one, read the directions that came with it. It'll tell you it can be used between this temperature and this temperature. If it's colder than this temperature, it may not be as effective. Okay? So generally, they're not good in below freezing situations. So if you're hatching or you have a mama with chicks outside and you want to take the chicks away and put them in an outdoor brooder and it's below freezing, a heat plate's not going to be your best option because they don't work very well in below freezing temperatures. I've had mine work very well to just above freezing, but once it's below freezing, you can't expect a heat plate to cope. They're not built for that. So there is a learning curve. Read your directions. Now let's talk about space and flock size, because heat lamps are better at warming a large area, which can be helpful for very large broods in really spacious brooders. One lamp can cover more surface area than one brooder plate. So one lamp can provide heat for more chicks than one brooder plate. However, you can just use multiple heat plates. That's what we have. We have more than one heat plate. We have multiple groups. We just use more than one heat plate. It's really not that big a deal, but again, more upfront cost, right? That's why we say they're more expensive to start, but they're cheap to run because they don't cost very much in electricity. But if you have a lot of chicks, you probably have to buy multiple brooder plates to make them work. So, right? It can be difficult to make the choice, but multiple plates can be used in a larger setup, and plates retain heat better, especially in insulated spaces. So they're more efficient. They will keep your chicks alive better if you have the correct setup. Now let's talk about real objections from heat lamp users, because we all know somebody who doesn't like new stuff. There's always somebody. Especially if you're in farm groups. There are people who they will not use a product created in the last 40 years. If it didn't exist 50 years ago, they don't want it. And that's their prerogative. But their justifications can be a little odd. So let's respectfully break down some of the common things people say about why they prefer heat lamps, okay? The first one you'll hear is, I've used heat lamps for years and never had a problem. Yeah, lots of people have. I used to use heat lamps. Many people have used heat lamps for many years without a problem. But statistically, heat lamps are still the number one cause of brooder fires. The fact that it hasn't gone wrong doesn't mean it can't. And survivorship bias is a big deal. It is something that infiltrates every aspect of our life. So I have a good friend that a couple of years ago, her house burned down. It's because she kept her chicks in the sunroom. She kept her chicks in the sun room and she used a heat lamp and she did everything right. She did all the right things. It was properly secured. It did not fall. It just caused a fire. And it was while they were at work and they lost their home. It happens and it's really unfortunate. But until it happens to you or someone you care about, you might be one of those people who's going, it's fine. I've never had a problem. Yeah, it's fine till it's not. Okay. The next thing you'll often hear is brooder plates don't get warm enough. They do, I promise. But only if they're used correctly. Okay. I'm an advocate for brooder plates because it saves chicks' lives. And it saves you electricity cost. It's just, they're a better option. That I'll be upfront about that. I used to use heat lamps. I switched to brooder plates because they're just a better option. They do get warm enough. You have to use them correctly. Like we talked about earlier, they do have to be positioned low enough for the chicks to make contact with them. So they have to be able to push their back against the heat. It's not the fault of a product if you are misunderstanding how it works. Okay? Learn to use the product before you actually use it. I'm outside today. And there are mosquitoes. Fun. Exciting. So let's talk about the next thing you'll often hear when you get on Facebook and you talk to the chicken people and you're talking about heat lamps versus heat plates. Someone's going to come up with, well, heat lamps are cheaper. They are. We already talked about that. They are absolutely in the short term cheaper. Yep. However, in the long term, between the higher electricity use and the bulb replacement that you'll have to do, the cost does add up. Okay. So just getting started, buying a heat lamp versus a heat plate, yeah, the heat lamp is cheaper. Long term, it will cost you more. So if you're in it for the money, you're better off to make the investment now, and then you won't have the higher electricity cost. They cost very little to run. Okay. You can actually look at the wattage on the boxes. They're very inexpensive to run. The next thing you'll hear is heat lamps are better for large numbers of chicks. This one, yeah, they can be. Honestly, they can be. There are brooder plates that have 20 plus chicks that can fit 20 plus chicks under them. They're rather large, like they're big. And using 2 plates is still safer and more cost efficient. But when it comes down to if you're looking at what covers more square footage for one product, it is heat lamps. Heat lamps do cover more square footage. Brooder plates can't compete on that level unless you're buying multiple brooder plates. That's, again, facts, right? That's just the way it is. Heat lamps cover a greater area. So yeah, better for large number of chicks. They can be. I would still rather have multiple brooder plates running than one heat lamp. Another objection you get is, well, I can see my chicks better with a heat lamp. This is true. Okay. That is true. If you have a heat lamp hanging, you can see your chicks running around underneath. If you have a heat plate, the chicks are hiding under the plate a lot to get warm. That's true. You are going to see more of your chicks if you use a heat lamp. But the constant light does stress out the chicks. And you can use a small separate light to check on them while still letting them rest with the natural cycles of day and night. Okay? Ultimately, it's about safety, not sentiment. At the end of the day, this isn't about what we've always done or what our grandparents did or even what's cheapest. For me and for a lot of people, it's about what gives our chicks the best chance to survive and thrive. It's not just being alive at the end of the day, it's are they happy and healthy at the end of the day? And they are happier and healthier for being allowed to embrace their natural rhythms, which heat lamps do not allow for. When you're looking at safety, behavior, long-term cost, and heat regulation, brooder plates do come out ahead. That's just where it is. They're not perfect, that's true, and they're not foolproof. Like I said, you have to read the directions. If you're not going to read the directions, if you've already decided in advance you're not even going to look at the directions, then don't buy a brooder plate. You have to check how high do they need to be set? What temperature range can they operate in? If you're not willing to read the instruction pamphlet that comes with the brooder plate, then don't bother buying one, because you're not going to be able to use it properly if you don't read the directions that came with it. Okay? But when they are used properly, they're safer, more natural, and ultimately more economical. And pocketbook does matter. I know we like to pretend we will put any and all money into our hobby farm. But at the end of the day, how much something costs does matter to me. I don't have unlimited funds, and I'm sure you don't either. So for the economical reasons, we also opt for brooder plates. So if you're brooding chicks now, or you're planning to in the future, it might be worth it to take a good, long, hard look at your setup. What works best for you? It's going to depend on your budget, your space, your flock size, that kind of thing. But don't let habit or hearsay be your guide. Let facts lead the way. So look at all the facts, look at your own individual situation, and decide if you're going to be able to make brooder plates work, if heat lamps are better for you. But don't decide based on what your great grandpa used to do. My great grandpa used to hatch chicks in a box under the stairs with hot coals. Sometimes things lit on fire because hot coals are quite flammable. So I'm not going to do what my great grandpa did. He did the best he could with the technology he had available on the plains of Alberta where they didn't have electricity. Okay? He did the best he could with the resources they had, which were hot coals. I'm not going to do that because I live in a different time with different resources available to me. We have power. I can plug something in that's way safer than hot coals. Okay? So when you're making decisions, don't let this is the way it's always been done be the guiding light. Let facts, science, and what works best for you in your situation guide you. Whether you're using heat lamps or heat plates, be fully aware of the risks and benefits of each and then make your decision. And be aware of those risks. If you're not aware of the risks associated with the options you chose, then you won't take steps to mitigate them. Okay? Acknowledge that those risks exist. So if you're going to use a heat lamp, acknowledge that your chance of starting a fire is high. If you acknowledge that, you are more likely to take steps to mitigate it. Okay? If you don't acknowledge that, you'd be like, well, I zip tied the clamp, it's fine. If you acknowledge that there's a really high chance of fire, then there's a greater chance that you'll take steps to mitigate that risk. Okay? So at least be honest about the risk you're taking. That is about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. Have you tried both brooder plates and heat lamps? If you haven't tried both, it's difficult to have an opinion on both. If you have a strong opinion either way and you have used both, share your story in the comments below. I'd love to know what worked or what didn't. So we've used both. I can have a valid opinion on both because I've used them both. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are if you have used both. If you haven't, maybe give whatever one you haven't used a shot and see what works best. Thanks for tuning in to this month's Farm Fights. We will see you next month for a different topic. We'll see you tomorrow.